Have you ever wondered why cultures have such similar stories of knights in shining armor and damsels in distress, but such distinct and unique visual art styles? Hi, I'm Olivia Donohue, DSP class of 2026, and today I will be talking about similarities and differences in art, media, and collective human thought across cultures. Before I started my research, I divided it into 3 different categories. The first one was folk tales, because they provide a more structured view of art. The second was visual art, because this is where I myself have seen the most difference in between cultures. And the third was poetry, because it combines the structure of folk tales while still keeping the imagery of visual art. After my research, I divided my findings into 5 different subcategories. The collective unconscious, motifs, and aesthetics all help to answer the question of why art might seem more similar, while religion and Eastern versus Western thought all help to answer why it might be more different. I'll talk about the similarities first. The collective unconscious is the idea that there's sort of a bank of knowledge that all humans have access to. And this can help explain why we see such similar stories of good overcoming evil, or the idea of a hero's journey. However, the cosmic hunt provides an interesting retaliation to this theory. The cosmic hunt relies on the inclusion of the Big Dipper constellation. However, in cultures where the Big Dipper is not as celebrated or is not even able to be seen in the sky, this myth is notably absent. This shows that while the collective unconscious can be used to explain some similarities, it cannot be used to explain all of them. Another aspect of the collective unconscious is the idea of art development. One study between Japanese schoolchildren and American schoolchildren found that they had very similar artistic progression, except for when their cultures started impacting what they were drawing and how they were drawing it. Archetypes can sort of bridge the gap between the collective unconscious and motifs. And these are kings, or the idea of like a jester or a knight. And these are seen across folktales from different cultures. The second idea of motifs is the idea of symbolic evolution. And what this means is that while a symbol might start off meaning one thing, such as fire being used to denote destruction, it can grow into meaning something else, such as rebirth. And lastly, aesthetics was the final point I found that sort of explained why cultures have such similar art. And it's important to recognize that this doesn't mean that all cultures share the same aesthetics, but just that all cultures present some sort of importance about aesthetics. And these aesthetics can change even within a single culture. Classical art used to put more of an emphasis on formalism, or representing a subject exactly as how it is depicted in real life. But it progressed into being more about symbolism and what the subject is trying to say within the art piece. The second point is very similar to symbolic evolution, but it's more about motifs. And this means that while a motif might mean one thing in the context of poetry or folk tales, it can mean something completely different within the context of visual art. And the last way that aesthetics can change is through cultural adoption. While this process can start off as cultural appropriation, the stolen motifs or stolen aesthetics can become so involved in the culture that it sort of becomes a part of the culture's art itself. Now I'll talk about the differences. Religion was a major aspect in defining why different art comes from different cultures. But first we have to talk about the distinctions between myths and religion. Greek mythology was often thought of to be the religion of ancient Greeks. However, new research shows that it should more be considered a sort of collection of folk tales, because it doesn't follow traditional religious mythos. And secondly, it also depends on how involved the religion is in the culture. Cultures that have a very distinct religion have often very distinct religious and secular art, whereas cultures that have a more ingrained religion within their society often have more homogeneous art. And Eastern versus Western thought also had a very big role in impacting how art was depicted and viewed. However, this was on a more fundamental level. For example, Eastern art places more emphasis on the overall harmony of a piece, whereas Western art places more emphasis on formalism. You can think of this as Western art places more emphasis on math and proportions, where Eastern art places more emphasis on the cohesion of elements within a piece. The second way that Eastern versus Western thought kind of diverged was within their thoughts of folk culture. In Japanese culture, for example, there is much less of a distinction between the mainstream culture and folk culture, whereas in modern-day America, there is a much larger distinction between folk culture and mainstream culture. And the last way that they disagreed was the idea of creativity itself. So Western thought often places a more active role on creativity, that the artist creates creativity within themselves and imbues that within their art, where Eastern cultures take more of a passive view of creativity, that creativity flows through an artist and into a piece. Although there are many reasons why art between different cultures might feel more similar, the inclusion of motifs, the importance of aesthetics, and their connection to the collective unconscious are all major reasons on why it might feel more similar. And likewise, religion and differences between Eastern and Western thought are all ways in which they might feel more different. This research could be furthered by asking the same questions, but in a more interconnected society such as ours today. Thank you.